Okay, can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we are in the planning stages, and I was originally, first of all, hi everyone. This is Annie from the Chumstick Coalition in North Central Washington, the Leavenworth area. And Allison was originally asked to share this today, and she has visiting fire personnel, so I'm pinch hitting. And when we were originally asked to talk about this, we were a little apprehensive because we're very much still in the planning process, but we're encouraged to share what we're learning even as we go through this process. So thanks to the great presentations on exchanges so far. There have been a lot of really helpful lessons that we're going to be trying to incorporate. But the essence of what we're looking at doing is really getting at some of the things that Justice was talking about earlier when they were trying to figure out what they needed to get out of this training exchange. And what we need to do a couple of different things, meet a couple of different objectives. And so one of the objectives for us initially in the Chumstick was to go down to Project Wildfire and see how they're funding some of their debris disposal, chipping, what kind of partnerships they have in place that allow them a pretty long-term sustainable success rate on that fuels mitigation, and really kind of get a good look at how that program works, because we have a strong need to increase our capacity for that here. And in talking with Allison and Ed, you know, we all had an assortment of needs and a lot of reasons to go visit and to learn, and we realized that we might be able to not only go and learn, but go and help the other people on the other end of the exchange by providing some teaching. And in our case, in Washington State, there are only 35 fire departments across the state currently enrolled in Ready, Set, Go. Allison and Ed and the other folks were instrumental in helping put together a Train the Trainer workshop for Ready, Set, Go that was held in Oregon earlier, and we thought, well, why not, during the training exchange, have them teach while they're here. So we thought, you know, sort of the framework for what we're doing is come, visit, learn, teach us, and teach everyone else while you're here too. And so we really want to raise the water regionally with these exchanges and build capacity in our local areas, not just by what we learn from having someone come and visit and share, but from what our region can learn from some visiting expertise. Sometimes it's really helpful if they're hearing, if your community, we think, is hearing from an outside source the same things that you're trying to tell them. So that's the premise of what we're doing. It's really a training exchange and a learning exchange. Okay, I guess we can go to the next slide. Oh, and we think we're biting off more than we can chew, which is probably true, but I think it's a worthwhile effort to try to take a big bite at this and see what we can accomplish. So the plan is that in the spring of 2016, we would start in the south and work our way north. So in other words, we would go head down there on a road trip, and each unit, so we've also been talking with Ashley and some of the other folks a little bit further south. Each unit would be responsible for their own site design. And so if you're the hosting, they would determine the workshop that they need. Home ignition zone training is one. What is FAC is another that we're talking about and working on designing. And then in our neck of the woods, as I mentioned, really identifying a need to increase the participation and the usefulness of programs like Ready, Set, Go and engagement on that front. And so we are going to be responsible for designing, hosting both the local training exchange element, our field days with the folks who come up to see us, but also the room, the logistics, all of the agenda, the pieces of the community workshop. And that was really the only way that we felt like we could break this down into meaningful chunks and manageable chunks for each of us to work on. And I'll talk a little bit later about, you know, spending some time figuring out what our overall objectives are, because I think we're trying to do a lot of a lot of things that are all consistent and all weave together pretty well, but you know, it's been an important thing, I think, for us to go through and say, okay, when we do the train the trainer up here, this is what we really want. When we go down and visit, this is what we need. And to be really clear about what those objectives are, both so that we have the ability to measure what progress or what results we saw, but also so that we can design these exchanges, these workshops, in the most positive and productive way. And really the goal is that there's a value there for the people doing the hosting, the people doing the visiting, and for the region itself because of this concept of including a teaching day, a training day for the region. It's one of the areas where I think we have struggled, at least in a North Central Washington standpoint, and where the added capacity of the network can really bring some extra muscle. So that's a good thing. And Ed, Ashley, jump in here, folks, if I go astray. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is what, you know, we didn't do a formal learning exchange with Ashland, Oregon, but I had the opportunity to go down to Ashland for another project and see a very well-organized, well-designed, amazing program with a logistically spectacular field day and exchange process. And so one of the things that I learned in Ashland was that logistics matter and enhance an already good exchange. And I think that that is something that we also just heard from the folks in Austin and Boise too. And it was readily apparent that in Ashland that a lot of thought and planning had gone into that entire process. And one of the things that was really spectacular about that experience was that we heard a lot from the partners and the people that we don't necessarily see when we go to Santa Fe or Colorado Springs. They're everyone else, you know, not just the network representative, I guess. And that was it provided a really full and complete understanding of how, in Ashland's case, the social license was achieved or is being achieved, and how they're able to be as effective as they are. And so, you know, I think that those are elements that we're working on designing as we start to lay out our workshop up here. The logistics, making sure that our partners are represented and also able to help tell our story, and something that we want to see when we head to the South too, because that's really, I think, one of the pieces that you don't necessarily see when we get together face-to-face that can be a real value in an exchange like this. And so I just wanted to put in a note to say thanks to Ashland, to Chris and Ashley. It was an amazing experience down there, and I appreciated the visit. So that is really feeding into what we are planning. Next slide. So these are the questions that we're wrestling with right now. As I said, we're still really in the planning process, but you know, how long is going to be an effective visit? How much time do we need together? And building in the training day and the travel time. And you know, the other thing that we kind of are learning is that this is, to be effective, this is not necessarily going to be perhaps the cheapest option, but that doesn't mean that it's not the best option. And so making sure that we're getting the value that we need given the size of the investment that we're likely to be making. And so, you know, we just heard a lot of the key lessons from the previous exchanges, and that was one of our major questions, is where value has been achieved and where you know, we can plan to add that value. And so, you know, again, as I mentioned, we're looking at objectives and how these objectives lead ultimately to that question of value. So we want to make sure that we're very clear with those objectives so that we can get the most value possible, and that we all get what we need out of this. And then one of our questions was, okay, well, what's going to set this apart from a phone call or a webinar, or what makes it so incredibly valuable, and how do we maximize those things? And like we just heard, the after hours, the camaraderie, the sharing, those are the types of opportunities that we're really trying to build in, so that we have the ability to maximize those things that really set it apart. And so again, that comes back to this question of logistics and making it run smoothly, and the fact that you just can't wing this one. Not that we wing anything else. I'm not saying that. We're not going to wing this one. So we're looking at a pretty heavy planning process this winter, trying to maximize those things. Next slide. So yeah, I guess we've been talking a lot about this, but each training has its own objectives. Each visit really going to have its own objectives. And so, what we want to see when we go to Project Wildfire will probably be a little bit different than what we're helping to teach and helping to facilitate from a regional growth perspective. And so being really clear about the objectives of both of those. And some of the things, on our end, that to give you an example of some of the objectives that we're really looking at meeting, for us, we want to increase the number of departments using and comfortable with Ready, Set, Go. Certainly our region over the last 2 summers is no stranger to evacuation. And yet I am still hearing things like, I didn't know what to do, and that has to stop. We have an opportunity, I think, in our neck of the woods to really capitalize on a lot of the myths that have been busted, the myths about wildfire that have been busted, myths like we'll never have to evacuate an entire town. I think we can safely say that one's gone in north central Washington, at least. Myths like, well, I'm just, we fight fire. That's what we do. And Rebecca's question earlier about mitigation and the role of the fire department is one that I think has also been quite thoroughly busted in our neck of the woods. And so there's a number of these things that feed into our objectives in a really rapidly changing fire environment and a really rapidly changing social environment. And so, when we started talking about this training exchange, it was post-2014, the largest wildfire in Washington state history, but before this fire season. And so, our objectives are evolving as the environment in which we are operating in is also evolving. But I think we have some nice opportunities, and people are really hungry for this information right now, and we need these types of training exchanges and learning exchanges to build the capacity, and the timing could not be better. Initially we really struggled to figure out, when do we do this? Do we do this in the fall? Do we do this in the winter? Do we set this for the spring? And I know traditionally the spring is a really busy time for all of us. And so we kicked around the fall, but we just sort of felt like, given the moisture contents in both Oregon and Washington and Northern California, that we were probably going to have a serious fire season, and that the fall would be asking way too much, and we would all be on vacation in the winter. And the spring teed us off really nicely for the spring. It gave us the planning time we needed. But it also enables us to sort of build on the hunger for change that I think we're starting to feel, and recognizing that that hunger will likely fade. But now, having this region in particular, having experienced these fires for 2 summers in a row, I think we have a little bit of momentum, and we're really looking forward to having some muscle in the form of our FAC partners come and help us teach and train and to meet those needs, as well as sort of talking about the work that we're doing on a local scale and what that environment looks like. I mean, we've learned a lot in the last, month, and so there's some things to share there. So it'll be, I think, a really valuable thing, that really wanting to tie it down pretty neatly to those evolving objectives is, I think, for us, the key message.